There's a quiet kind of rebellion happening in the world of woodwork. It isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with precision joints or traditional forms. It doesn't chase symmetry or function or even logic in the conventional sense. It shows up in layers, in shapes, in grain lines pulling in conflicting directions. It's called contemporary abstract wood assemblage, and it lives somewhere between sculpture and story, between instinct and structure. It's the kind of art that doesn't beg to be understood but insists on being felt. Visually, emotionally, even physically. It makes you stop, tilt your head, squint maybe. Not to figure it out but to feel your way through it. Because that's the only way it works. This kind of art doesn't start with a plan. It starts with pieces, offcuts, fragments, leftovers, maybe from a furniture project, maybe pulled from the bin behind a sawmill, maybe scavenged from a demolition site where someone else saw trash and you saw potential. It begins with textures. Smooth planed faces lying next to jagged, splintered edges. Soft pine bordering on blackened walnut. A strip of charred cedar that once held fire. A square of birch so pale it almost glows. Each piece has a history and you don't erase it, you let it speak. Because in assemblage the material tells you what it wants to be. There's no blueprint. No sketch on graph paper. It starts with placement. Arrangement. A kind of choreography between shapes and voids. You set one block down then another. You lean one upright. Slide one under. You shift them again. Until the tension feels right. Until the grain lines push against each other in a way that almost hums. It's like tuning an instrument except the sound is visual. The harmony is spatial. Sometimes you don't even glue anything down for hours. You just arrange and rearrange, letting your hands make decisions your brain hasn't caught up with yet. And then something clicks. A composition starts to emerge. A negative space carves itself out. A line starts to form, maybe diagonal, maybe vertical. You notice rhythm, repetition, disruption. Suddenly the whole thing feels like a landscape, or a skyline, or a memory you can't place. There's no tree, no house, no obvious form, but the emotion is there. The balance, the dissonance, the beauty. That's the magic of abstract assemblage. It bypasses your need to label and goes straight to your instincts. The actual assembly might involve adhesive, nails, screws, whatever gets the job done without drawing too much attention to itself. But there's also care, respect. You don't just slap things together. You weigh the relationships between every edge and face. A thick block of reclaimed oak might need a sliver of mahogany beside it to balance the visual weight. A jagged, irregular triangle might need a smooth circle nearby to soften the aggression. You consider height, shadow, depth. How far a piece will protrude. Whether it casts light or swallows it. Color plays a role too, not in the traditional sense of paint or pigment but in tone. In the contrast between golden maple and nearly blackened walnut. Between gray-aged barn wood and freshly planed birch. The finish, or lack of it, is part of the language. Some assemblages are left raw, dusty, untouched, the surfaces speaking of age and wear. Others are sanded to a silky sheen, polished until the grain looks like it's been painted on. You might leave one piece rough sawn, with saw blade marks still etched into it, and place it right next to a block that's been oiled to a deep, warm glow. That tension between finished and raw is where a lot of the emotion lives. Mounting is another dimension entirely. Some assemblages hang like paintings, flush against the wall, creating shadow play as light hits each relief. Others jet out, fully three-dimensional, coming off the surface like architecture. You might frame it. Or not. You might let it breathe out to the edges, open and untamed. Some artists float their pieces slightly off the wall, allowing light to sneak behind and cast soft outlines. Some assemble them onto backer boards, plywood, metal, sometimes acrylic, to give structure. Others let the whole thing remain open-backed, like a puzzle laid bare. The scale ranges wildly. Some assemblages are palm-sized, a tight cluster of toothpick-thin shards arranged into a minimal moment. Others span entire walls, a mosaic of wood with shifting planes, endless depth, and unrepeatable geometry. But no matter the size, the intent remains the same, to build not just with wood but with feeling, with impulse, with instinct. In contemporary abstract wood assemblage, rules are suggestions and symmetry is optional. Some compositions might lean toward balance, repeating shapes or mirroring forms to create harmony. Others deliberately disrupt that expectation, throwing in an offbeat angle, a too large block, an unexpected pop of contrast. It's not about creating something perfect. It's about creating something that breathes, something that resists perfection in favor of presence. And there's a tactile quality that you can't ignore. Even if you're not supposed to touch it, you want to. The surfaces beg for your hands. The curves, the edges, the raw grain that hasn't been sealed away. You feel the story through your fingertips. You trace the corner of a cracked pine block and wonder how old the tree was. You run your palm across a strip of reclaimed mahogany and try to guess what it used to be. A drawer front? A stair tread? Part of a church pew? Every nick, every gouge, every uneven face is a thread in that story. People walk past these pieces and pause, not because they know what they're looking at, but because they don't. Because it isn't trying to look like anything else. It just is. It occupies space in a way that defies utility. It's not a shelf or a table or a chair. It doesn't hold, support, or contain. It expresses. It questions. And in doing so, it frees both the maker and the viewer from expectation. That's rare. That's powerful. And for the maker, there's a kind of quiet joy in the process. A kind of liberation. You're not measuring twice or cutting perfectly. You're reacting. Trusting. Responding to each piece like a sentence in a conversation. You're not fighting the irregularity, you're building with it. Letting the crooked edge guide the next move. Letting the dark knot in one plank determine the position of another. It's not chaotic. It's choreographed. But only loosely, like jazz or a dream. Some assemblages are heavy. Monolithic. Anchored. Others are light, airy, made with thin strips layered like feathers or scales. Some are orderly, blocks arranged in grids or ascending steps. Others feel like a swarm. A burst. An outpouring. Some use only wood. Others incorporate metal, resin, wire, even fabric. But wood is always the backbone. Always the base. Because there's nothing else that carries that warmth. That history. That depth of memory baked into its rings. In galleries, these works often stand out, not because they're louder than paintings or brighter than sculpture, but because they feel more grounded. More personal. Like they belong to someone even if they haven't been claimed yet. And when someone finally does claim them, hang them in a home or a studio, they don't blend in. They anchor the room. They change how the space feels. How the light hits. How silence settles. They become something more than art. They become presence. A stillness in the room. A reminder that creation doesn't always need reason. That beauty can be built from scrap. This isn't about balance. Or tradition. Or symmetry. This is about energy, trapped in wood, then let loose through cuts and angles. Contemporary abstract wood assemblage isn't trying to be understood. It's trying to be felt. It doesn't ask for approval. It declares itself. It's jagged, clean, raw, sometimes chaotic, sometimes too quiet, but it never tries to disappear. This is where scraps become statements. Blocks that don't belong together are suddenly pressed edge to edge, grain clashing, species clashing. Maple next to walnut, next to stained pine, next to charred ash. It shouldn't work. But it does because you're not following furniture rules. You're following rhythm, movement, tension. You build until it hums. You don't plan everything. You start with an idea, maybe a shape, maybe a pattern, but the material always interrupts. A piece cuts short. A knot ruins the grain. A corner splinters. You adapt. You pivot. You let the mistakes become part of the form. That's where the life creeps in. Too much control and it goes flat. Too little and it falls apart. You walk the edge between impulse and intention and you build until it clicks. These aren't pieces meant to hold anything. They're not shelves. Not signs. They're built to hang, on a wall, off a frame, sometimes even suspended in air. They're not decorative. They're sculptural. Dimensional. Built to pull you in and then push you back out. Some scream in hard contrast. Others whisper in tonal layers. But none of them explain themselves. It's not about finish. It's about edge. You leave hard cuts exposed. Glue lines visible. Ends jagged on purpose. Sometimes you plane things smooth and sometimes you leave the planer marks in. Sometimes you sand until your fingerprints blur. Other times you stop at 80 grit and call it done. Not because it's rough, but because it needs to stay rough. You glue blocks like pixels, out of sync, off grid. You align some grains and intentionally break others. One board bleeds left, the next pulls hard right. The whole thing feels like it's shifting even though it's locked solid. That's what makes it work. Movement inside stillness. A tension you can't quite name. It's not about matching. It's about contrast. Texture versus smooth. Light versus dark. Dense hardwood pressed up against soft, porous pine. You might add burn lines. Blackened edges. Saw blade scars that you choose not to hide. Every mark is a voice. Every piece is a fragment of a sentence you're not fully allowed to read. And color? Sometimes. But rarely bright. More often it's natural but intentional. Oil for warmth. Shellac for clarity. Sometimes you stain one piece charcoal black, not to make it modern but to make everything else pop. Or you throw in a single painted block, off-white, dead flat, just to break the wood completely. Remind the viewer, this isn't a table. It's a decision. You don't frame these. The edge is the end. That broken, stacked, irregular edge is part of the message. It tells you, this piece isn't finished in the way you're used to. And that's the whole point. This isn't woodworking to hide mistakes. This is woodworking to amplify them. To let them speak. Some assemblages are tight, geometric, planned chaos. Others are loose, open, full of negative space. Slivers suspended between gaps. Shapes that look like they're falling, but aren't. It all depends on what you want the viewer to feel, not what they're supposed to see. There's no right reaction to these builds. Confusion is valid. So is curiosity. Or silence. And sometimes when you're building one, you don't know when it's done. You stare at it for hours. Add one more block. Remove it. Add it again. And finally, something clicks. You feel it land. Not with logic but with weight. Like music that hits the right chord, not because you understand the theory but because you felt it. That's what abstract assemblage is about. Feeling. In grain. In line. In shadow. It's the opposite of clean design. It's mess distilled into something that holds together just long enough to leave a mark. When it hangs on the wall, it doesn't sit quietly. It confronts. It interrupts. It reminds you that art doesn't have to be smooth to be finished. That wood doesn't have to be furniture to be valuable. That structure can come from collision, not just construction. It makes you look twice, then look again. And that's enough.